Facebook, YouTube, it's 11 o'clock. Welcome to our Landlord Live. We are joined with the Letting Supremo, Sally Eubank. She's not nervous, I promise.
I am very nervous.
I keep dragging her onto these because they're really important to do these lives, and we'll jump into it in a minute. And off the back of what's been happening in the last few weeks with landlords coming to us, basically, in short, a lot of landlords, just these last couple of weeks, have come to us in bits of, they're in little pickles, and they need our help to get them out of it because they've not handled the tenancy correctly, compliantly from the start. So we thought, rather than just help these landlords individually, let's do a Facebook Live and talk about the 3 things all landlords must know. And we're going to be talking about fines that you probably didn't know existed. We're going to talk about compliance that you probably didn't know has come into law. Now, if you're watching this and we manage your property, you ain't got to panic, because we're very compliant. If you're watching this and you've got another managing agent, you should check up to make sure they are doing what we're going to talk about correctly, because ultimately you might have a managing agent, but you're liable at the end of the day. They're the ones, you're going to get the fine. Some landlords in the past have been imprisoned, not to make it really extreme, but it happens if you're not careful. So let's jump in. Sally, tell me about a situation. You messaged me the other day and said, I'm trying to help this landlord because, give me an example of, they were self-managing.
Self-managing, correct.
Wanted to, was it to get the tenant, serve the tenant notice?
So the landlord was always planning on coming back to the property next year, but he'd found out about a situation whereby he wasn't happy for the tenancy to continue. So he contacted me to ask me my advice, which we always give kind of extra advice even to landlords where we're not managing their properties.
Like an advice line all the time.
Yeah. As I started to sort of unravel the situation, I realised that he was non-compliant, I would say probably at 90% or something like that. And he wants to serve notice, and in order to serve notice, he's got to be fully compliant, because otherwise it could turn out very, very challenging for him. So through the process of unraveling that, and even with, you know, quite a few years experience under my belt, I had to take legal advice from our compliance officer to get clarity on some things which even I didn't know. And yeah, sort of a can of worms situation, I suppose. And we got that clarity as to all of the things that hadn't been met, should have been met, and what the possible implications of them not having been met were.
So let's break that down, right? So from a compliance perspective, I was reading we're doing a bit of research. I was reading an article and the statistic shows that 48% of landlords apparently don't serve their tenant with the how to rent guide. Now that's a compliant document that you've got to share. And if you want to then serve notice on your tenant, you've got to serve notice, obviously. If it goes to court and they don't move out, you've got to supply all these documents that you should have supplied. And if you didn't supply them, you've got a problem. What's an easy way for landlords to get the how to rent guide and share it with their tenant?
So the how to rent guide is a government produced document, so you can download it from the government website. How we do it is all of these documents are issued as part of, so we issue the tenancy agreement, the prescribed information, all of your compliance documents, and the how to rent guide, obviously through the platform that we use, and everything is signed for by the tenants to prove that they've had those documents. So you can do it yourself, but you need to know what it is that you're actually required to do in order to meet the criteria.
And with the tenancy, you've got the how to rent guide, EICR certificate.
Yep. So your EICR, EICR is your electrical, gas safety, EPC, how to rent guide are your compliance documents which need to be issued at the inception of the tenancy.
And what's mad is you can actually get fined for not supplying the certificate.
Yeah, so even if you've had the inspection done, I think it's £6,000 for an electrical safety testing. So potentially liable. Sorry, everybody.
I think a lot of landlords think, oh, it's fine, I've got one of them, so they're compliant. But if they haven't issued it to the tenant, it's not compliant.
Yeah,
so
and on really that, important. You know, it's a minor thing, and this is where I'm always saying this to landlords. You need a record of you having issued it. So you don't want to just be putting the EICR or the gas safety or the how to rent on the side in the property. If you are, that's fine, but take a photograph of it. Make sure that you've got it documented in a paper trail, because if you do end up in a sticky situation, you need evidence that you have provided all of these things.
And there's software out there. So we use one called Blink, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure landlords can landlords go to that directly or not? I don't even know, actually.
I would have thought so.
Yeah, it's just like an online piece of technology that actually handles all your compliance, because all that should be issued at the point of tenancy agreement. Let's talk about tenancy deposit protection, because in the last 6 months, I reckon I've spoken to 8 landlords that actually, they're like, oh no, I've got the deposit in a separate account.
Yeah,
that's
their own account.
That's amazing. Well done on that. But have you protected it and issued the tenant with the prescribed information? And if you haven't done that, the fine can be huge, right?
Yeah, so when we were speaking to our compliance officer recently, if you haven't done that, there is the potential for up to 3 times the deposit as a fine.
Plus
obviously plus the deposit amount.
It's 4 months worth of deposit, and given it's 5-week deposit now, isn't it?
Yeah, so the one that we were talking about the other day that I was trying to unravel, it would have meant £8,000 in total, which is huge. And that's just on the deposit. And unfortunately, in this situation, also not it was compliant on the EICR, but hadn't issued the certificate, all sorts of things, So, I mean, the fines are huge, absolutely huge.
So I guess takeaway number 1, for any landlords watching, is be compliant, have your gas safety, EICRs, your prescribed information, how to rent guides, all that kind of stuff. But you've got to issue it to the tenant.
You've got to issue it, and you've got to educate yourself.
And an easy way would be just email it to them and say, can you please confirm receipt of all the documents? And then you've got it on file.
Absolutely.
Or use technology like Blink that we use, where it gets issued with the tenancy and they can't not tick to say, I've received it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, because with Blink as well, when we issue the tenancy agreement and all the compliance documents, they're also issued with the prescribed information at the point of signing the tenancy agreement. And obviously, they're signing electronically to say that they've received all of these things. So we've got a paper trail to say that it's all been done. It is a bit of a minefield.
And the problem with these things is that they're not really a problem. I mean, it is a problem if you're not operating compliantly, but it won't actually bite you in the backside until the end of the tenancy. If you're trying to get the tenant out, but they can't find alternative accommodation. I'll talk through a situation in a minute. It's happening as we speak. Or you've got a deposit claim, maybe for damages or dilapidations, and then it all comes to surface. Tenant don't want to pay it. You enter into a dispute. The dispute resolution service are going to end up saying, can I have copies of this, and this to make sure you're compliant?
Yeah.
If you weren't compliant in the slightest, they're going to rule in the tenant's favour. Yeah. Whether what you're claiming for was their fault or not. And this certainly isn't a bash the tenant live, because tenants are paying extortionately risen rent because of the economy and the way the world's going. Rents are going through the roof, which is good for landlords in some aspects. But tenants are going to struggle to, I think, pay rents moving forward. So you just got to make sure that you're providing a safe, compliant, you're operating properly. And I think the worry is that there's a lot of what we call reluctant landlords, that maybe the house wasn't selling, they want to rent it out, and they know nothing about being a landlord, which is why they need a managing agent.
Yeah, sort of accidental landlords. I've been one myself, and thankfully at the time, I mean, I wasn't in a brilliant place myself to kind of cope with all of this, and I didn't really know this then. And I had a really, really good managing agent at the time who navigated me through the process. But it is a minefield. It's constantly changing. I mean, obviously with the compliance is really important, and rightly so. You want to be providing a safe living environment in your dwelling for your tenant. It's kind of almost like the admin side of it, isn't it? It's I don't think we have anybody that hasn't done them, apart from the one that we were just talking about. But it's, have you actually then followed up with the issuing of the documents? Because that's where you could come into a sticky situation if you come to serve notice, or if you've got a dispute, relationships potentially broken down with the tenant or something. You need to tick all the boxes, and it is constantly changing.
I had a landlord come to me last week. Their tenants are lovely. They're actually friends with the tenants almost now. Been there 5-6 years, always paid their rent on time, never missed a beat. Lovely tenants. Landlord's a very good landlord, but she wants to sell the property because she has to. She's found herself in a bit of a situation and wants to ask them to leave. She served them notice, and they're very politely saying they're not going to move out. Still paying their rent, and they intend on paying their rent the whole time they're there, and they're going to look after it, but they're just not going to move out. The reason is because in that 6 years that they've lived in that property, they've become borderline unrentable. Unrentable too, if that makes sense. In a nice way. I mean, they're great tenants, but their income has gone down. The rents have gone up as to what she's paying and has been for the last 5 years.
Mm.
So the multiples of income, they're not going to pass that from a referencing perspective.
Yeah.
They haven't got enough deposit built up. And anyway, she's tried to help them the best she can and say, I'll help you with the deposit, but they're just not being accepted by anybody.
Well, I think also the landscape has changed so much. I mean, I don't know, I've lost track of the years now, but let's say the last 2.5 years, the rental landscape has completely changed. And we're often having conversations, aren't we, where, you know, whether it be somebody renovating a property and wants to move into rented, or a tenant wants to move on and get something different, they don't realise actually how difficult this market is at the moment for applicants. There is just not enough rental stock to meet the demand of applicants. So in that situation, like you say, they're probably paying a lower rent than they would likely have to pay now for a similar property.
Yeah.
And if they've also become unreferenceable for some reason or whatever, it's a very different landscape.
And in that time, I think the landlord mentioned that the tenant had a default on credit.
Yeah.
And so that's going against him. And it's the most loveliest, amicable situation ever, because the landlord wants to help them. They don't want to be a nuisance on the landlord. They want to move out so she can get on with her life.
Yes.
But they can't physically make themselves homeless if they can't find, if other landlords or letting agents aren't going to let them rent. So then the next step is go to the council, I guess, and say, look, I'm being evicted. I need some help because I can't find nowhere to rent. But then the council aren't doing anything until you've actually been through the court proceedings. They're still not doing anything until it's been higher court enforced that the locks are changed. And when the locks are changed, they'll put them. But that's going to cost about £3,000 at least in that kind of thing. So it leads on to my next. I mean, on the compliance side of things, you remember there's about 168 pieces of landlord legislation that every landlord has to comply with. And on the situation I've just spoken about, have rent tenant protection in place. Yeah. That's a big thing that we're advising, not because the tenant, they might be amazing tenants, but things change. And if you've got a kind of rent warranty, a tenant protection in place, that will cover you. The policy will cover you to evict them and not have to pay the 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 quid that it could cost.
I think now more than ever. I mean, you know, in all the years that I've been doing this, I never really used to get even that involved with rent protection and legal protection warranties. But now I do encourage.
And the reason for that is because you're very professional in that you find the right landlords for the tenant, the right tenants for the landlords and the property, and you do a lot of front end suitability checks. Yeah, absolutely. And that's mainly what it is. Like it's suitability checks basically. But you can have a tenant right now or dual household income, lovely people, 150 grand household income, and something change in their situation. So the kind of rent protection, landlord protections there to cover those. It's like a car insurance. You hope you don't need it, but when you do,
I hope you don't need
thank God you got it.
With the cost of living as it is, I mean, I was horrified yesterday. I went and put petrol in my car, which I don't do very often because I don't really drive very far. Last time I filled it up, it was £65. Yesterday it was 90 something, and I thought, oh my goodness, you know. And everybody's facing these massive increases and everything. So your kind of average person is now going to be struggling.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But yeah, so I think now is a really good time to have rent protection. We can do all of the checks that we do, and we do everything sort of by the book, tick every box, but we're also super thorough from, as you say, from a suitability point of view, looking ideally for dual incomes and stable, what's the word I'm looking for, where people work, whatever. But you can't control that. You can't control it. And so a rent guarantee and legal protection policy is a really good idea, for sure.
To cover the unplannable eventualities.
Yeah.
So I'd have thought of actually. Mr. Gordon's left a comment. I think interest rates have gone up more than rents in a lot of instances. So I think landlords are feeling it just much as tenants. Yeah, I get it. And you're obviously a landlord yourself. So it's making sure that it's just a fair outcome. We've never been the type of agents, and our landlords aren't the type of landlords that are like, every renewal, let's see how much we can squeeze out the tenant.
No, quite to the contrary, actually. We've even got some that have approached us and said, you know, we're going to reduce the rent. You know, there is, which is lovely. I mean, we're really lucky to be in that situation, and we always try to be as fair as possible. And if we know that somebody really can't afford it, we will explore other options with them.
And I guess as well, a good bit of advice for tenants is, if you haven't heard from your landlord in a couple of years about rent, then approach it yourself.
Yeah.
As well. Don't sit around and think, oh, that's good news, because they might come up in 3 years' time.
It's something that's a massive jump all of a sudden.
A massive jump. You're better off saying, I'd rather pay an extra £25-50 a month now and work into it, and we'll review again in a year's time, rather than put me up by £200 a month. Run me over this thing, actually. Something's come into my mind recently that happened, and it was if a tenant turns 18 or 16 during the,
so that's
if a child.
So that's to do with right to rent checks. So obviously when a tenancy starts,
so that's, rewind a little bit on that, sorry.
Yeah.
But another massive compliant drop for landlords that self-let and self-manage is the right to rent checks, right?
Correct.
And that's separate from how to rent. That's separate from tenancy deposit. You've got to make sure the people are legally allowed to rent. Is that pretty much what it is?
Exactly that.
The right to rent check.
Yeah.
And this is additional legislation coming recently, I think, ish.
Yes. So up until October the 1st, as agents, we were required always to carry out right to rent checks, and how you would do that is by physically meeting the applicant at a viewing. If you didn't meet them, if it was one of the viewing team doing it, they would then come into the office. You would meet them with their passport or whatever other supporting documents they needed if they didn't have a passport, and then you would verify that this is a true likeness to this person. Obviously through COVID and lockdown, we had to be creative with that. All agents did, and we had to do it virtually, so we would do it with video calls with people sitting with their passport, etc. It's now can all be done. You can still do it that way. You can't do it with video calls. You can still do it face to face, but you can now do it digitally. That's a word I can never say. And we do it via Blink. So anybody that is living in the property, whether they are the tenant, a permitted occupier, or a child, has to be subject to right to rent checks. So what we have to do is to sort of survey our tenants on a regular basis to check whether or not anybody living in the property is likely to turn 18 in the near future.
So it's the landlord's, so this is really important, right? So it's the landlord's obligation to check regularly. I guess on moving, you can be like ages of everyone living there.
And then diarise, yeah.
But this is where inspections become important, because if they've moved in a friend who's 17 at college, who's helping with the rent or something, and they haven't got right to rent, and they turn 18 and they haven't got right to rent, it's the landlord's backside that's on the line.
And that's also, you know, when you're a managing agent, although our portfolio is growing at quite a rate and it's quite large, we have still got that very personal contact with all of our tenants. So we know all of our tenants, who they are, who's living there, how old their children are, and we've got that all kind of documented and diarised. But if you don't know that, you could come unstuck.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think if you're self-managed, you know, I think some landlords as well right now are probably less inclined to go to fully managed because of the extra cost involved. But you've got to offset that against what if you drop the ball on a bit of compliance during the tenancy. At least with a managing agent, we've got really good processes and systems in place to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. And if you are going to self-manage, inspect, make sure. I've spoken to landlords who have called me to sell their property, rented out, and they've said, oh,
don't know what it's like.
I asked a condition, and they're like, I've got no idea, to be honest. I've been there in 3 years, and I go there, and they're disgusted. So you've got to inspect, you protect your investment, protect yourself from a compliance perspective,
and have a relationship, because that's how you know all of these things. Have a relationship with your tenant whereby you are inspecting. You know, even recently, another thing that this particular person fell foul of was the recent change to the legislation around smoke alarms and CO2 detectors, which came in October the 1st as well, to make sure, whereas previously it was only a CO2 detector where you had solid fuel burned and an advisory for any other gas appliances. It is now law that it is by all gas appliances, so gas fire, boiler. The only one that's exempt is a hob. But again, he hadn't done that because he just didn't know. And
but there could be like, I guess a house could have a gas fire in the living room, a gas fire in the dining room. They could have even like maybe upstairs. Some people put them in their bedrooms now to make it look really nice. So that's really important. Again, important bit of compliance update: CO2 detector next to every gas appliance,
except hob. But do you know what? I'd put one next to the hob as well. I always think better to over again. Yeah, definitely. I mean, for years and years, I've been asking landlords to put CO2 detectors in, even if there wasn't solid fuel burn, just because it's another box ticked. You can go to sleep at night knowing that you've done everything you can as a landlord to protect your tenant and the property.
Now check this out. Loads of things are coming into my mind as Sally's talking, but Sally surprised me recently when I didn't know this, I've been doing lettings for years and years and years, was the Legionnaires test.
Mhm.
In what situations do you need one of them?
So a prime example of, so you don't necessarily need a Legionnaires test. What you need is a Legionella risk assessment. And as a landlord, you're perfectly entitled to do that yourself. You can go onto the government website and it can tell you exactly how to do a risk assessment, or you can recruit an independent Legionella risk assessor to do that for you. They will assess the property. If it comes back as low risk, then you don't need to do anything. If they highlight areas of concern, then you would go to the next stage of Legionella testing of the water. And a situation where that might happen is, for example, if we've just taken a property on recently where we know that it's been empty for 2 years. So it's the landlord's parents' property. It's been empty for 2 years due to their personal circumstances. It's now been fully refurbished, but on chatting a few weeks ago when we were getting ready to let it, like, how long has it actually been empty? A couple of years. So, right, okay. I really strongly recommend that you have a risk assessment done, because you haven't had the water flowing, through the taps and the central heating system and everything. So it's a potential source of Legionella.
And it comes back to cover your backside.
Yeah, it's
for
about
the
£50.
50 quid to cover your backside, because if a tenant moves in, has a shower, get really sick, get really ill, it's your backside on the line.
Yeah.
Another really interesting one is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and I might be wrong.
I think you're surprising me with lots of things I didn't know you were going to ask me, aren't you?
I am. This is all planned.
Yes.
The Legionnaire, so like, let's say you've got a block of flats,
Mhm.
and you've got a communal cold water tank
Mhm.
that feeds, and this happens a lot,
Mhm.
believe it or not. Not every individual flat has got its own hot, and obviously generally now it's got a combi boiler and its own feed straight into the house. But some flats go into a communal big water tank up in the loft, feed into the flats. Although it's not your tank in the loft, it's your job to make sure the water coming into your flat
is safe.
It's safe.
And again, so in that situation, you'd be looking to have a good relationship with your hopefully good block managing agent. Because I would imagine that they would be responsible for Legionella testing of the tank, as you say, from the point at which it comes into the property. And again, you can just do a risk assessment, but you would want to know.
You would assess right there. There's actually, because there's a communal storage water tank, it's a higher risk that it could have
high risk.
So then you're probably going to cover your backside by just getting one done.
I mean, if I was, I'm not a landlord now, I was an accidental landlord due to a situation whereby I had no option. I couldn't get out of a mortgage, had to rent it. I didn't have a clue. It was before I even was involved in letting, sort of 20 plus years ago. Yeah, I think if it was me in this situation, I'm overcautious. I'd rather know that I'd ticked extra boxes.
But I think it shows the tenant as well that you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you're going to keep things really compliant and safe for the tenant, but you know what you're doing as well.
Yeah.
If you don't speak to the tenant for 3 years, they could be getting away with all sorts. And some tenants do. I've gone to properties to inspect and they've moved in their mates and there's 2 friends in the spare bedroom. And it's like, whoa, they're not on a tenancy agreement. We need to discuss this.
A lot of the time, I would imagine it can be quite awkward unless you're a very sort of confident person to actually have that direct relationship with your tenant. Because let's be honest, sometimes you can go to an inspection and it's not how you expect it to be, and you've got to actually have some quite awkward conversations. And that's why I always think having an agent or even employing an independent inventory clerk to do your inspections for you puts that one person removed, so you've got a barrier between you, and then they can have the difficult conversation.
If it was me, I'm a bit biased maybe, because we actually have got a really good lettings property management team. Even if I didn't want to have it managed, I would outsource the inspections to somebody like us. I mean, we only outsource those to a specialist company, but you can come via us. We can put you in touch with them to make sure it's done properly. Because let's say something's flagged up and you don't act on it, you then can't use that 4 years later and be like, 4 years ago, I noticed this.
Yeah.
Because you didn't act on it at the time. So that's really important. And that'd be thrown out. Richard Watson's in the house.
Hi, Richard.
And he's a landlord protection you were discussing separately from your rent guarantee policy. No, so that's all the same thing. So you'll be covered, I'm pretty sure, Richard.
Yeah, so our rent guarantee policy covers you for up to 6 months rent arrears and up to 100,000 in legal costs.
Yeah. For evict,
and actually we've just moved over to a new provider, which is superb. So
we're actually going to be pushing out a new landlord update. There's quite a lot so Richard is a landlord of ours. We manage 2 of his properties. He's an awesome guy. And we've got some updates coming that's making our property management side even better, even though It got way better when Sally joined us 2 years ago. Is it 2? Or what?
Yeah, 2 years in
2 years ago.
August. Yeah.
But yeah, you'll be covered because you're a landlord of ours, first and foremost. But there's new providers out there. That kind of stuff got really expensive during COVID, obviously.
Oh gosh,
and
yeah.
they're starting to get more competitive again. So we're always shopping around for the best providers for our landlords. Something really important to note here, actually, really important, 25 minutes in, but 3 things landlords must know. One of those things is, with the market getting tighter, letting agents are looking to increase their revenue, obviously, as are we. We increase our revenue by hopefully finding new landlords, by giving great advice like this on YouTube and Facebook Lives. But I've heard some stories recently that letting agents, a lot of them, are not only increasing their fees to landlords during this period, but they're also increasing how much of a kickback they want from contractors. So it's important to know, one, we don't do that, but I'm not going to talk, if we've got a big refurb going on at the minute, a £7,000 a month house, just sold it to the buyer, renting it out, and it's failed the EICR. I mean, this place hasn't been rented out for 25 years, whatever. But it's failed miserably on the EICR. It's about £10,000 worth of remedial work. Now, ordinarily, that would cost a landlord probably £12,000 because the letting agent would be
put a markup,
bumping on top either a project management fee or a kickback that they tell the contractor, bang 10% on that invoice, and then you can give us a kickback. So it's really important, if you want to increase your ROI on your investment, don't squeeze your agent down on fee. Just make sure they're not marking up on contractor invoices. And they'll mark it up. Some say, oh no, but they pay us that out of their marketing budget. It just shouldn't happen.
Well, it's usually actually the contractor that's squeezed. So let's say a gas safety is £80. The landlord will still only pay the £80, but the contractor will only get 60 or whatever. And I know, I'm a bit old fashioned, but I'm a firm believer in using people on their merit rather than because you're getting a kickback. And I'm really adverse to it, actually, adverse.
And so am I. That's why we're on the same page.
Not necessarily on project management, because we have done some pretty epic projects where we actually haven't charged anything. We've spent a vast amount of time and it was really satisfying. Landlords are super happy, but probably, in another scenario, you could consider something like that because it's so big.
As a manager, you manage generally the tenancy at the
that's not getting it all ready for the tenants.
But this was a multi-property landlord of ours. She bought another property. We rented it out during COVID to a tenant that was quite happy for it to be in poor condition because he wanted to place. We said, look, let's get through COVID, everybody. Let's then refurbish it while you're in it. Gave him a bit of a reduction on rent, managed a refurbishment, and that was a really good situation. But everyone's looking to gain margins here because everything's getting so expensive. We aren't by far the cheapest letting agent and manager out there, but my advice to any landlord, talking to any letting agents, us or anybody else, is just look at the overall cost over a 12-month period as well, not just a percentage a month or my rent you're taking. And that was pretty much 3 things landlords must know, Sally.
I think that was about 33, wasn't it?
Was it?
Yeah.
Well, there's 3 main things. Let's recap them.
EICR. Well, all compliance
documents.
Compliance,
yeah. And the point on that is compliance. And if you want, drop us a message, an email, call the office, and we'll send you a list of those things that you must do.
Yeah.
But more importantly to that is supplying them to the tenant.
Supplying them and having a paper trail as evidence should, God forbid, the need ever arise for you to seek a possession order, whereby then you've got, I think we've only ever had to do 1 possession order, but you have to provide all of these documents. And if you haven't got them,
bearing in mind the quote to the client recently, she come to me and said, oh my God, it's going to cost me like $3,000. The solicitor's quoted to get this tenant out. And I said, it hasn't got to cost that much, leave it with me. But that's assuming the tenant doesn't object.
Yes, exactly.
Now, if the tenant objects, you could have a 6-12 month court case, and maybe tenants will do that more to get longer in the property.
And unfortunately, we're still feeling the repercussions of the pandemic in that everything is pushed back. So, the only possession order I've ever issued, the tenants actually ended up moving out before the possession order came through because there is such a backlog. So you need to factor that in as well if you particularly need your property back quickly. But the key to all of this is actually preparation for the first tenancy, isn't it? And then keeping on top of it moving forward.
Yeah, it's compliance, but issue them. it's get the right advice, whether you have an agent do it for you or not. Just get a good advice from people like Sally and me. I'm not trying to load all the inquiries onto you.
They'll give it to you, and then you'll give it to me anyway.
Yeah. So compliance and issue them, protect yourself. And you could have the best tenant in the world right now, and you can take protection during the tenancy, right?
Rent protection.
General protection.
Absolutely, yeah.
As long as they're not in arrears.
But it's really important to know, and I hate to be the voice of doom, that you can, let's say you're a landlord that hasn't issued your compliance documents, carried out right to rent, registered the correct deposit amount with the thing. You can do it all now or for your next tenancy, but unfortunately that doesn't go away, and you could still always be liable for that period before if the circumstances were to arise. And I have just remembered one other thing that we definitely did want to say just before we go was about if you're a let-only landlord and you're handling your tenants' data, you need to be registered with the ICO.
Good thing.
We forgot about that one.
Literally, because I've taken this completely off plan.
You have, yeah.
But ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, if you manage your own tenancy and you advertise your house on Facebook Marketplace or wherever you might advertise it, and you're getting inquiries from tenants, you're now processing their personal data.
Yeah.
So you have to be registered with the Information Commissioner's Office.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that could come unstuck, because if it goes to court or there's a dispute and it's like, great, can I have your ICO registration number, and you can't supply it, you've fallen short of compliance.
And on all of these, obviously, you want to be doing this anyway. I mean, particularly the safety ones, everybody wants their property to be compliant, but without going into detail on them, all of these, EICR, gas safety, not registering with the ICO, deposit, there are significant and substantial fines. Without, I mean, we're not talking hundreds, we're talking thousands.
Up to 30 grand for EICR, I was reading, and that's not necessarily because someone's got hurt because of lack of compliance, just by not being compliant. And look, the trouble is, it's a tough time for landlords at the minute because they're being squeezed, in my opinion, personal opinion, but landlords are really, because rents are going so high, government or whoever are like, let's make this more licensed. You've got soon to come in is maybe the let's not go into it now. I might do another live about this, but the no fault eviction. There's loads of things that is going to.
That's not happening yet, but obviously the next thing we've got coming in, I think September 25 at the last time we talked about it, is the APC rating's got to be a C.
Yeah.
So,
I spoke to landlords recently that have said, I've got to sell my property. I'm like, why is that? And he said, because it's not a C rating and it's going to cost me about 150 grand to get it to it, because it's a grade 2 listed place. So there's all these kind of things that you've got to think about. We'll do more another time. This is the second one we've done in 2 years, but we're trying to make it a bit more regular with real life situations that are flagging up, that how we're helping landlords out there. Share it on video, get it on YouTube. Everyone can watch it whenever they want. It's been awesome. So,
and you can always just call us, whether you're a let-only landlord, we're always happy to sort of give advice. And also, we're constantly learning it because it is constantly evolving and changing. So,
well, I looked at it this morning, and depending on what you read, there's like 168 different landlord legislations. It was only 5 months ago I checked, and it was like 142. So
what was that statistic you told me at the beginning?
48% of landlords didn't supply their tenant with the right to rent, with the how to rent guide.
Crikey.
And I've got some more statistics. Was my mouse not working? Hang on. This is really cool. 38% of landlords, and this was a big old survey. It was the English Private Landlord Survey. 38% of those questioned didn't check a tenant's right to rent.
Yeah.
48% did not issue how to rent guide.
Yeah.
And over 30% failed to provide carbon monoxide alarms. Now, the whole carbon monoxide alarms, I'll be straight, that's just terrible. That's like playing with someone's life. Potentially.
Yeah.
And that's not acceptable. And luckily, I say only, but that's 3 in 10 landlords.
But that's why, even going back years and years, I mean, you can get a carbon monoxide detector from any DIY store for sort of 20, 25 quid. And even though it wasn't law, I've always said to landlords, please, can we just put one in? Because I can sleep better at night knowing that it's done. And they can as well.
I look at my house. I've got obviously 4 kids, and we've got a 3-story house, and Tash puts one in, I think, in every room. It's ridiculous because she fears stuff like that. But the good thing with that statistic is 70% of landlords are doing it.
Yes.
But it's the 30%, and they're probably the ones that are those horrible landlords that we don't even want to deal with. So it's the ones that want to be compliant, look after their tenant. There's lots of legislation coming in to protect tenants from scrupulous landlords, obviously, which is a good thing, I think.
Absolutely.
If you're going to be a landlord, do it properly or don't do it at all. And I hope that was helpful. Less nervous now?
Less nervous.
Sally's
now.
awesome, but we're just working on this. Let's get the information out there. And it's hard typing it all out because 35 minutes of typing would have taken ages. Thanks for watching. Drop us a message if we can help at all. And we'll see you on the next live.
Thank you.
Take care.